We have our genetics done. We're going to start taking a look at names from our family tree. Joby James Myers, circa 1917. Mary Amanda Platter Myers, circa 1919. So I use circa because it's saying about, around. So you saw that earlier. So the dates aren't going to be completely accurate. But again, it's approximately the time that we know them, but it doesn't mean that it shows up like that in the census. This is what I found on Ancestry.com, the 1940 census. You see Joby Myers, the only time I've ever seen his name like this. And I'll talk about that more later. You see he was 23 at this time. He was married and living on Manning Street in Dillon, South Carolina. He currently rented that property, but he was working on his own accord. He highest grade completed was 7th grade. But if you see in the house, you see Grandma Mary. The JG, supposed to be JD, that's Uncle's son. The Addie Plato is supposed to be Platter. Like I said, they will misspell words. That is Grandma's grandma. We'll get into that. Grandma's mother. Sorry, we'll get into that later. Marzello Platter, that's Grandma's aunt. And Sarah Catherine. I'm sorry, that's Grandma's sister. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Adam Marzello Platter, that is Grandma's sister. And Sarah Catherine Plato is also Grandma's sister as well. You'll see that their names are misspelled. But again, that's something that you have to think that's the census writing down the names and writing down incorrect. But again, this was in 1940. Now, Addie Covington and John Platter came together and they formed Mary Amanda Platter Myers, who we know as Grandma. Or Mama for some of you. Grandma Mary M. Covington. This is her records to show how John Platter lived with them at the time. He and Addie Covington were never married, but they did, have children together. Once again, you see that man in Dillon, South Carolina. You also see the name Amanda Covington. That is our great grandmother, if you're a grandchild. And Cassie Covington, of course, that was a cousin, but she was taken in as a daughter. And then you see Aunt Minnie Lou and Marzella. See her name is spelled different here. Instead of the Sarah Catherine, now they just have Sarah C. And there was a Cassie M. Someone else had a child that was named Cassie. It was a little baby, but she didn't live. Isabel Stockholm was a boarder. She was living there in the house. From what my mom told me, she believed that she was Lee C's, who was Grandma's adopted brother. She believed that was Lee C's mom. And if you want to go to Ancestry.com, I can send you those records of, there was maybe around when Grandma Mandy was 70, she was taking care of Lacey by herself, and they were the only two in the house. But I didn't include that because he, just for not having, the records on there. But just to tell you that information. Look at John Platter's family first. So John Platter is confusing whether or not Frances Platter is his mother is assumed. So I'll put a question mark there. It is true that his father's name is January Johnson. And of course, his name is John Platter. And you'll see why it may be a little confusing here on the next slide. Okay, so you'll see that, again, John Platter was born around Florence. And his father's name was January Johnson. But if you go to Ancestry.com, you'll see that Frances Platter is portrayed as just a worker in the house. But John Platter is portrayed as a son. So I'm assuming since they have the same last name, that actually is, her child. And he doesn't have the name from Jerry Johnson. So I'm assuming that Jerry Johnson maybe, had a relationship with Frances Platter, but they never married. So he just kind of considered her to be like a cook for the house. And, but John Platter was to live there with him. So now we're moving on to January Johnson's parents, Jane Johnson and Sampson Johnson. January Johnson, again, kind of still staying in that Florence area. It's a black male, and you see his parents are there, Sampson Johnson and Jane Johnson. He was a laborer at that time. And you'll see I added this part to show you that he had tons of family, tons of brothers and sisters as well, that we may not know about. Emma Johnson is the only one that's an in-law at the bottom. She's married to Louis Johnson. So that's also on Ancestry.com. So again, that is some information, and hopefully that will help you to kind of know a little bit more about that. But feel free to kind of look up some of those names if you go to Ancestry. Just want to provide the information for you. This is the end of my research on Grandma Mary's paternal lineage, but now we're going to talk about her mom, the maternal lineage. So again, we're reminding you, Addie Covington, John Platter, Mary Amanda Platter Myers. Remember, that couple came together to form Grandma. So going back to this one, remember you see Addie Covington there, and you see her mom, but you don't see her dad. You see Amanda Townsend, and then our Mandy also as well. Her name was also Amanda at sometimes. You'll see Lawrence Covington was her husband, and they formed Addie Covington. Here, that Manning, Dillon, South Carolina, is still there again, and Amanda T. Covington. So the T standing for Townsend Covington, and she's married to Lawrence Covington. There are some, other people there, and you see Isabella Stackhouse, which I'm feeling like, again, Isabella Stackhouse is the same Isabella Stockholm that was in the house earlier. And then she maybe have gotten married, or something like that, but she's kind of like consistently around. There are other people there. You see Bessie Owen and Freddie Owen. They're boarders in the house, so they're not related to us. They're just people who were living there. That's how they did it on the census. And again, as we're looking, you'll see that they are both married, and they have some children. So we do have more people in our family that we just don't know about. And though all those names are there for you to see. We're going to take a look at Lawrence Covington's parents and siblings first. Lish Covington was his mom, and Ned Covington was his dad. Lawrence Covington, you see, he was around Marlborough, South Carolina, born there. See his parents, Ned Covington and Lish Covington, and some more of his family. All right. So Lawrence was seen to be one of the oldest male in the family. Then he has, a few sisters and a brother. All right, going to take a look at Amanda Covington's lineage. Esther Townsend and Neil Townsend. Now, this was very helpful from Nookie's research with Esther Townsend. I remember that, so that helped me to kind of find everything. So I appreciate her prior research with that. You see Amanda Townsend. I just remember my mom telling me that a lot of times they made them change their name because they said, oh, Mandy's not a name. So they made them change it to Amanda. The same thing that they did to Grandma. Her real name was Mary Mandy Covington, but they made her change it to Amanda when she became older. So you will see the Neil Townsend, Esther Townsend, and then you will see that Amanda Townsend is one of their children there as well. Her birthday is a little off here, so that throws off with the census there. But for my research, this appears to be the person we're looking for. Now let's take a look at Neil Townsend's parents. Edith Townsend and Alfred Townsend. Neil Townsend, you see his two parents, and this is a little different. You see the census in 1850, of course, slavery, was around that time. And we see Alfred Townsend. If you go to Ancestry.com, you'll see that they didn't label them as mother and father. They just called them male and female, as they all existed in this house. So you can tell that this was a transition from slavery because they didn't really consider black marriages to be marriages. So some census would call it a marriage and other census takers wouldn't. So in this instance, they didn't call it a marriage, but you can tell by the way the ages and the connections that they're at least family in some form or fashion. This is where our history research stops because you see both Edith and Alfred were born slaves who eventually became free. The next slide, you're going to see that information. Look here, Alfred Townsend. His name is, I put the red arrow there for you to see that. Look across the top, schedule of the whole number of persons within the division allotted to this person. So he was their slave owner. And our great-great-grandfather, he was one of his slaves. So Alfred Townsend was one of the slaves who eventually became free because when I did my research later with Ancestry, you will see later they said free inhabitants. So he eventually became free, but at this time, when the census was taken, he was actually a slave.